All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Fanfiction Tapes. I'm your host today, Maya, pronouns she, her, and I'm joined by.
Bryon.
And as always, I'm our producer, Ian, and my pronouns are he and him.
Today's episode, Tock, is all about timing, a key element in humor and comedy. And at first thought, you may not entirely realize some of the importance here of timing and humor, but it's important enough that we decided to dedicate an entire episode this month to it.
Hey, Maya. This seems
Yes?
like a good opportunity. Knock, knock.
Who is there?
Interrupting coefficient of friction.
Interrupting.
Move.
Interrupting.
That is one of my favorite knock, knock jokes.
Right, so there's some useful elements that we can mine from this little exchange here. So first, the form of the joke. The standard knock knock format is something that we all recognize because we've all been subjected to thousands of these, and they help put everyone who's involved in the mindset of, oh, here comes a joke, which is an important thing. Jokes are all about creating a sense of tension and then resolving that tension with a surprise. And jokes that follow a standard form, whether they're knock knock or XYZ walk into a bar or how many whatevers does it take to screw in a light bulb, these are all standard formats that help the people who are involved realize that, oh, I'm in a joke, and that serves a useful function.
And the particular importance of timing in that joke and the joke that it's riffing off of, the interrupting cow knock knock joke. Normally, in a knock knock joke, you wait for the person you're telling the joke to say who. But in this case, you have to interrupt them to make the joke land. So the timing,
of course, surprise
is important.
Yes.
Right. In this case, the timing doesn't just enhance the surprise. The timing is the surprise. And that's not going to be true for all jokes, obviously, but it is quite a nice illustration of the fact.
Yes.
Now, that timing is going to be different in a lot of different circumstances. And it depends upon, a lot of times, what the person's trying to achieve. Timing, when we talk about timing, what we're really talking about is the distance or the length or the weight between when the tension is created and when it's resolved. The distance, if you will, in space and time between the setup and the punchline. And again, that's going to vary from situation to situation. Airplane, very funny movie. It has entire sequences where every line or every second line is delivering a punchline, and it's flying so fast and furious that when one of the jokes doesn't work, you barely even notice because the next one's already coming, right? So this is a sort of an avalanche effect where they just keep the momentum rolling, and jokes that might not be that funny on their own sort of accumulate into something that just leaves you on the ground in stitches. Other jokes are more meandering and take a while to resolve that tension.
Yeah, so there's a joke that I like to tell that builds suspense over a period of time. It's partly joke, partly true story about the idiocy of myself and my friends while we were in high school. And I slowly build suspense and tension rather than repeated punchlines.
And there are times when the person involved may not even realize that they're in a joke or that a joke is coming until something happens which recontextualizes what came before. So there's one of the ones that I really like goes a little like this. I hope to die peacefully in my sleep like my grandfather, not screaming in terror like his passengers. And so let's break that apart real quick. So we've got the two major parts. We've got the first part, which creates an image. This is one of my favorite jokes, and I'm now going to ruin it for everyone by overanalyzing it. We've got the first part, which is creating that expectant state, which is, and what it's doing is it's creating this image for you. It's drawing on our collective idea of what it means to die peacefully in our sleep. We associate that with like being in bed, right? Being in a peaceful scenario, not just that we're at peace, but the situation is peaceful. And then the second part completely changes that, and the Passengers illustrates that it throws a completely different image into our head from the one that was created initially. So when you tell the first part, the victim may not even realize that they're in the middle of a joke until the second part hits. But even that being said, they are happening close enough together that there's the tension isn't going for very long. Right, it's still sort of a quick and dirty kind of joke.
Mm-hmm. You can take that sort of thing and draw it out really long, and I think that's called a garden path joke. And there's a comedian named Emo Phillips who has really made a career off of this. And one of his jokes that's been around for a long time now. Some people consider it one of the funniest religious jokes of all time, and it takes this, lulls you into the sense of security for a long time, because if you see this one written down, it's like 4 paragraphs long.
Pretty sizable, yeah.
Yeah. So the joke is, once I saw this guy on a bridge about to jump. I said, "Don't do it." He said, "Nobody loves me." I said, "God loves you. Do you believe in God?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Are you a Christian or a Jew?" He said, "A Christian." I said, "Me too. Protestant or Catholic?" He said, "Protestant." I said, "Me too. What franchise?" He said, "Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist?" He said, "Northern Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist or Northern Liberal Baptist?" He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region or Northern Conservative Baptist Eastern region?" He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879 or Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912? He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. I said, "Die, heretic," and I pushed him over.
I kind of saw where this one was going. Like about 2 lines in, because.
But
right, but so in that case,
it draws it out.
Yeah. Right. The tension ceases to be what is the punchline going to be, and becomes, how long can this possibly be drawn out? Right? How many more? How much more firmly? How many more iterations? How can we make this happen before we get there? And yeah, that can be a powerful thing as well.
Part of all these jokes as well is in their delivery, not just purely when things happen, but how you deliver that win. There's, in the previous joke that Ian was just telling, there is a cheerful air to the whole thing right up until the sudden shift of the "die, heretic."
So it also helps quite a bit, I think, that the "die, heretic" line, which signals the shift and really is the punchline, is so fast and so compact, right? In general, I am of the opinion that punchlines benefit when they have that force. If your punchline, if you have written a joke and the punchline is like a whole is like 15 words long, the punchline probably got lost in there somewhere. If your punchline is 2 to 3 words, then it has a much higher probability of landing. Now, that I don't mean to be prescriptivist by that. I just mean to suggest that when you're trying to surprise someone, you usually are more effective at surprising them when you're using fewer words or using less, when you make it more compact. That helps it land.
Yeah, it's about kind of the surprise you can see coming isn't really much of a surprise.
Right. And if you have to make I was going to say if you have to make someone realize that they've been surprised, that that means you've kind of lost the point as well a bit. Unless that also is part of the point. So I think that I may be uniquely equipped here to discuss a particular subject, if I may, which is dad jokes. So
by all means.
Yeah. So dad jokes have some important elements of timing, and that's because you have to realize that dad jokes are not quite the same as other jokes. It's not, the surprise is mostly from the other people, right? Dad jokes are interactive. You can't tell them by yourself, right? Then it's just a joke. What makes it a dad joke is the disparity between how funny you think it is and how funny your victims think it is. Right? That's where the majority of the humor comes from. When I tell a joke and I'm laughing and my kids are groaning and moaning in their seats, that is where the true joy of the dad joke resides. So there's some and this is where timing comes back into play. Because if you can draw it out just a little to where everyone knows, oh no, something is coming, and they have that moment when they realize you're about to say something awful, then that heightens it because it increases that disparity, right? It gives them a moment to dread. That anticipation really helps increase the disparity. So if I'm going along and I say, oh, was that joke a small explosive? Because it was abominable. So the difference between how funny I think it is and how funny, and then everyone goes, oh, right? But that little pause between when I end my question and when I deliver the abominable, and especially if I draw it out to ensure it's there's attention there, then that increases the effect, right? Because it gives the people a moment to realize what's coming and focuses their attention on it. And then when what comes out is something that is really not worth the effort put into it, then it makes it even funnier for me, right? Because at that point, the perpetrator of the dad joke is drawing most of his amusement from the fact that the other people are not amused, right? So that's what separates just a dad joke from a garden variety pun, which is the interactivity of it, right? The tension that's being resolved is the difference between how funny the two different parties think something is. And so timing can really help with that to enhance that effect by emphasizing that disparity.
That is a really interesting perspective on dad jokes that I hadn't really thought about before. I'll definitely have to share this episode with my dad, who is a huge fan of dad jokes and has made more than his share.
Yep. So in writing terms, right, if you're trying to make that particular brand of humor land and make it work, one thing that you do to emphasize it, and variations of this work with all jokes, but if you can show the dread of people when they see the joke coming, and then especially if you show the person who's perpetrating the joke wearing a grin of some kind or looking inordinately pleased with themselves, then then you're really leaning into the shtick here. One thing that can be useful in writing when in writing jokes is remembering the interactivity of them and having people react to them. You can sort of fool the audience into laughing along if you show other people having fun with it as well. Or conversely, again with the dad jokes, if they if some people are groaning in pain when it arrives, then that is working, like I said, working with the shtick.
Yeah, now I have to reread a book that is a favorite of Ian and mine's, because near the end of it there is a dad joke 2 books in the making. And given the way the author set it up, I'm now going to need to analyze it with the lens that you have provided me.
Oh, I'm glad I was helpful. So another thing that, another kind of joke that shows the importance of timing would be the running gag, right? So a running gag works, the way that a running gag works is that when you tell the joke in its full form initially one time, right? It may not even be funny at that time, but when something happens that becomes a punchline to a later thing that happens, then you've got a running gag going. So Rumiko Takahashi is the expert of running gags, in my opinion. She's a manga artist who's been operating for quite a while now. And an example, there's a character with an awful sense of direction who is routinely late to things and gets into all sorts of trouble because they literally can't get to where they're going. And so the miracle of this sort of humor is you only have to set it up once. Once it's established as part of that person's character that they have this flaw, this awful sense of direction, then to make it land, all you have to do is say, meanwhile, Ryoga was somehow in Hokkaido, right? And the fact that you've pre-established that all the setup means that the punchline lands immediately, right? That's all you need. And that allows it to deal these sort of sharp jabs of humor, if you will.
Right. What came to mind to me with running gags was Red versus Blue, another long-running series. And the one that's particularly popular is second worst throw of all time, ever. Which starts off with when one of the characters throws a grenade, landing it directly in front of himself and someone he's working with. And then after that, all they have to do to kind of conjure up the humor there is have a throw that goes kind of poorly and say second worst throw ever of all time.
Right, because each iteration then is a reference to this awful thing that happened earlier. So you have the setup now. The setup to that joke is now built into your mythos, and it can be tapped whenever it's needed.
Yes, and we got a little bit off track of the loose outline I wanted us to follow, so I'll try and bring us back on track here as we're 20 minutes into the episode. And one of the things kind of setting up this episode from our end was the difference between comedy and tragedy is partly in time. And the timing of things here worked out rather uniquely, as we mentioned last week, and as I'm mentioning again today, recently there was a submarine that, or well, submersible, I believe, technically, went missing underneath the ocean and was found to have collapsed. And at first, when you hear, oh, there's a submarine that's missing, we haven't heard from it, your initial reaction is, shock, concern for the people inside. And time goes on, we learn a little bit more about it, and we go, oh, that's kind of more funny. And then you learn the details about the safety regulations that were ignored, the CEO's name, the price of tickets. It becomes funnier and funnier until weeks after the incident, jokes such as, "Sir, there's been a second submarine," become funny.
Yeah, "You've lost another submarine" could even function as a reference to Hunt for Red October. But yeah, so one of the things when we're talking, so this is sort of like topical humor, which is timing not of the joke itself, but of the timing of the joke in its broader context, in the context of linear time. But topical humor, one of the things about it is it has a shelf life. So when I was just starting writing, I made a stab at topical humor that included a joke having to do with Janet Reno visiting Miami in a festive mood. And the two of you probably just reacted to that with, who? What? Why? Right? So again, topical humor, the thing about topical humor is that the setup is our current state of mind and the current things that we're thinking about and that we understand. And if Janet Reno hasn't been on anyone's mind probably for about 25 years now. So what the significance of Janet Reno's vis-a-vis Miami, even for the people who understood and were conscious of that sort of thing when it happened, it's been so long that it's just not part of our daily lives anymore. And so to even remember that takes so much brain time in terms of brain processing time that by the time we dredge up what we're supposed to know about that, there's no surprise anymore, right? If we don't have an expectation, then there's nothing for the joke to play against, right? So that's the danger of topical humor, which is that we've talked about jokes needing to have a setup to deliver the punchline. Topical humor uses our current frame of reference and our current understanding of the world as the setup, which allows it to cheat a bit and get straight to the punchline. The danger is that if once those conditions change and we're not thinking about those things anymore, the setup is lost. And so those jokes don't age well. That's the real challenge of humor, which is if you want the joke to be relevant for more than a couple weeks or so, you have to create the setup yourself. You have to put in the work.
Right. Currently popular memes, such as the only one that honestly came to mind was Poland Article 5 with kind of one of those Wojaks with a really wide smile, which references the ongoing war in Ukraine. Hilarious at the time, funny right now. 2 years, 3 years from now?
Mystifying.
Yeah. There is, I believe, I remember in the research for this episode reading about the world's oldest joke, which is something along the lines of a dog walks into the bar and says, "I will open this." We have no idea what it means anymore. We've lost all of the context for what made that funny.
I think I've read some stuff about that joke, and there's something about there being a pun between opening your eyes and opening a jar of beer. I think that's kind of where scholarship is at what the context for that joke is, but yeah. It's untranslatable now.
Yeah, so it reminds me of some commentary, some shrewd commentary that I read in the course of the novel Wise Man's Fear, which was at one point a character ingests some alchemical thing, which makes him lose his ability to judge against societal expectations. And he tries to go and do something funny, and then he stops because he can't think of anything funny, because the fact that he has lost all sense of normalcy of what people's expectations are means that he can't operate against them, and so humor has become a foreign language for the duration of that alchemical effect. So,
that's very interesting.
Yeah, not strictly a timing thing, but it seemed pertinent to where our discussion had meandered at the moment.
Yeah, there's a similar effect in one of Brandon Sanderson's books as well. I believe I've actually read Wise Man's Fear, but I must admit I don't remember that scene in particular. Guess it's time for a reread.
Yeah, they're worth it. I like them very much. Patrick Rothfuss, good stuff.
Right, King Killer Chronicles.
Yeah, well, except that apparently the latest news is that he's dropping another novelette instead of the third book in the series, so bah.
Once again, I'm remembering the meme comparing George Martin, Patrick Rothfuss, and Brandon Sanderson with the text, "These three made a pact that they will only shave when they've finished a novel." Of course, George R. Martin and Patrick Rothfuss have big ZZ Top beards.
And
Brandon Sanderson is clean-shaven.
That's funny. I like that one. But yeah, so like I said, not strictly a timing thing. But speaking of the the thing that was said earlier about the difference between comedy and tragedy being time, and part of it, I would say, is our ability or our instinct of sympathizing, right? Something can be right. The whole too soon, right?
Yeah,
too soon is shorthand for has enough time passed that this doesn't hurt anymore, right? And because only when it stopped hurting can it properly be made fun of in a way that is appreciated and not grounds for retribution.
And sometimes the phrase "too soon" can itself be a bit of a joke if you're talking about something that is either patently trivial or patently way outside the window of pain. Like, for instance, it's a bit of a running joke in the Firefly fandom. The movie Serenity came out almost 20 years ago, I think.
It's been a hot minute.
It has been a hot minute, and you'll still see people respond. There's a character death in there. Hoban Washburn, the pilot of the Serenity, is impaled by a Reaver's spear.
Ooh.
Spoilers.
Yeah, spoiler for 20-year-old movie.
Yeah. And so there's a running gag for fans of the show. How do Reavers clean their spears? They run them through the wash. And the standard response to that is too soon.
Yeah, related to that this is especially common for like dark humor jokes. And I'm going to date myself a bit here, but one of the things that I partially grew up with was 9/11 jokes. And those would have been unimaginable in the years directly following the events of September 11th, 2001, at least within the United States. But today, they're fairly common. Actually, the joke I made earlier this episode, "Sir, there's been a second submarine," is in itself also a 9/11 joke, referencing the somewhat infamous phrase, "Sir, there's been a second plane."
Yeah.
But just to focus on why Too Soon is so effective as humor and why it keeps persisting, it's a great punchline because it's quick to say, too soon. It's two quick words that have a nice little bit of alliteration going. They've got some good assonance there. It rolls right off the tongue. It communicates all of its meaning very quickly. So that falls into one of the principles that I had earlier about how the punchline can land very easily and very directly. And it's drawing upon this understanding that we have about how the appropriateness or inappropriateness of jokes. So it works very well as a punchline because it's got a lot of meaning concentrated into two very small words. And so it hits very hard and very immediately.
Yeah, sorry, I've just been recently sent a rather funny joke by one of my friends, and I had to try really hard not to burst out laughing in the middle of the episode. I will have to post it afterwards so we don't break down. And I've already lost the plot.
So we were talking about different timing and the too soon discussion, right? So, and I was commenting about how good of a punchline too soon is and what makes it a good punchline. And so kind of along the similar lines of banter is similar in that it has a lot of its power in how it goes rapidly back and forth between characters. The speed with which it's delivered, especially if they're being clever, can really make it work, because part of what's going on is part of what makes the banter funny is our being impressed that someone could have a reply like that on tap or be able to generate one so quickly in the heat of the moment, right? So that's part of what makes banter work, is how clever people are being in the heat of the moment. So the back and forth nature of banter is what makes it effective, because it's both condensed in time and time becomes a part of the discussion. It becomes part of what makes it funny because they were able to go back and forth with such speed.
Yes, my friends and I have dedicated a Discord channel to recording some of our banter because wit on its own can be how you come up with responses like that quite quickly. And at least for me, that's my reaction of just how are people able to be that funny? I'm not always quick with a response.
Right, because it's a different skill. It's a different skill to be able to generate a response quickly as opposed to being able to write a good joke, right? So there's a whole neurological explanation for how different neural processes happen, about which there's some tasks that draw upon your knee-jerk reactions, and that your proficiency in them is based upon the part of your brain that handles things at speed. It has to do with how developed your heuristics are, which I am saying solely because I like the word heuristics.
That's a good word.
It's fun to say. As opposed to the part of the brain that thinks about things in more of a time relaxed manner. So I'm going to, may I digress a little?
Absolutely. This is partially the ADHD talking hour after all.
All right. So I remember being utterly fascinated by something I saw in, of all things, a video game magazine. So this video game magazine had a running feature where two of their editors would pick up a game neither of them had ever played before and just try their best to beat each other up at it. Great stuff. And one of the things that they tracked was their record in different genres of video game, not just individual games, because they may never play each other at those games again, but by genre. And the biggest disparity in genres was one of them had an overwhelming lead in real-time strategy games, and the other had an overwhelming, insurmountable lead in turn-based strategy games. You may be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, they're both strategy games. Don't they both use the same circuits? And the answer is no, not at all. It's like I was, and this is where I tie it back, where we're talking about different parts of the brain that are controlling these different things. The part of the brain that is generating quick responses and is concentrating on speed is a different part of the brain from the part that does your deep thinking, and they have different strengths and in different people. One will be stronger in another person. So amusingly, this is why the trope in many anime of the seemingly dull-witted protagonist who is able to think lively on his feet in the heat of battle actually is plausible, right? Because being able to get good grades in school doesn't mean that is actually turns out to be completely unrelated to thinking on your feet when the bullets are flying, if you will. They're just completely different parts of the brain. But it also means for us, this also gets back to the banter point and provides some words of comfort for us as writers, I think, too, is that if you're, watching people go at it, or you're reading people bickering back and forth and marveling at their ability to come up with these quips just on the fly, you can take solace in the fact that you don't need to be able to do that to write humor effectively, because that's a different part of your brain. The fact that you can't banter like you wish you could banter, like the characters that you're reading are bantering, doesn't mean you can't write banter, because when you're writing banter, it is
you have all the time in the world.
Right. It's the slow analytical part of your brain that has taken precedence, and now you're able to go as you will. So you can, all of which is kind of the long way of saying that yes, you too can write banter even if you can't do it. It's okay. Try it. Fun.
Yeah, my dad has always been very, very witty and kind of on the spot with responses, whereas I'll think of something really funny a couple of days later.
Yeah.
And a couple of days later, it's not necessarily as funny as it was in the moment.
Right, because it's a
couple of days later.
Kind of humor. Right. And not only that, but again, the referent, right, the thing that it was replying to has long been lost. Right, so it's lost its place in time. The setup is gone. Yeah, so to put it in language that we've been using earlier, when you've got characters bantering back and forth, you can use them as each other's setups. Right, character A provides the setup and character B provides the punchline, and then depending upon the speed with which they're going, there may be another punchline right back, and that speed, especially if it's only two characters, as a writing technique, this is where you do things like you drop the dialogue tags, right? You simplify, you streamline your prose so that the flow can go unencumbered. Right, so you emphasize the speed by cutting anything that's unnecessary from your prose. Let it go.
Yeah, and this actually kind of brings us into one of the topics I wanted to hit near the end of the episode: advice for pure written media. Part of the things about timing and a lot of the ways you can use to make jokes funny rely on having multiple modes of communication. You have pitch, you have kind of your tone of voice, you have how quickly someone is actually saying the words, you have facial expressions and body language in movies. And when you're writing a book or when you're writing just a fanfic, you don't have any of those tools to help convey jokes. In fact, even your ability to use timing is somewhat limited because the pregnant pause that's used in a lot of jokes, you don't have that when you're just writing text because it's going to get read at the speed your readers read. You can do a little bit to split it up through dialogue tags, but not really much you can do without it feeling kind of awkward.
Yeah, sometimes you can make an ellipsis do work for you here and there, but best used sparingly, right? So when I find that method has utility of controlling the pacing with ellipses when I'm telling the dad jokes because that moment of anticipation is so important to it. But other types of jokes would be actively harmed by that sort of thing, right? So the ellipsis is serving double duty here. It's both delaying the arrival of the punchline to build that moment of tension and controlling the speed and drawing attention to where the punchline is going to be, announcing its presence for all to see. But if you tried to slot an ellipsis into banter, it would actively harm it.
Yeah. I would just kind of in terms of general advice I might have, look at how you're maintaining and producing suspense within the joke. And things such as putting an ellipse in banter is going to diffuse that suspense. And basically whatever you can to not diffuse that. Jokes through written media are, as I mentioned, a little bit more limited in terms of how you can deliver it. And so you have to be careful. Ian, do you have any advice for written media jokes?
So one thing that you can do when you're we've talked about using the form of the joke as something that helps people alert people that something's coming and create that expectant state. And one thing that you can do in these cases is have characters talk, right? And having another character speak between the setup and the punchline can help with that in certain circumstances. So like if you think about it this way, if you were telling a knock-knock joke, it wouldn't function if it was just if you were going knock-knock, interrupting cow, right? Without the who's there, the form doesn't fit, right? You need the other person speaking to maintain the rhythm of it. And so a lot of times you can use another character's when one person is saying something, is delivering the setup, you can make the form fit if you have another character speaking between the setup and the punchline, either to provide additional setup or to manage the rhythm of it. Also, keep your punchline. Make sure your punchlines are punchy. I've said it a few times. I really believe it. The funniest joke that I believe I ever told, I resolved with 3 words. Just all of them. I'm not going to explain it here because it's entirely too context dependent. But I resolved it with just all of them, 9 letters, and that was it. And and it just slays me. But yeah. A punchy punchline will do a lot better than one that has to wander around a bit to find the surprise.
Yeah, even as I mentioned the joke I tell earlier, which I usually call the bat story, as it revolves around an exploding bat. The joke itself meanders quite a bit, but the punchline itself is Probably about
60.
6 or 7 words.
To be clear, that is an exploding baseball bat, not an exploding flying mammal.
Yes.
Okay, I'm glad that you provided that point of clarification because I had the wrong mental image in mind. I have now corrected. And that is humor, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, I think we're about out of time here this week. Do we have anything in the mailbag, Ian?
Nothing new has shown up in our inbox or on our comments since last time. So if you listening have anything that you want to say to us, you can shoot us an email. Our email address is fanfictapes@gmail.com. You can also leave us a comment on YouTube or on a rating and review on whatever service you listen to. And you can also get in touch with us on Twitter. Maya, you run our Twitter. What's our handle there?
Yes, our Twitter handle is @fanfictiontapes, capital F, capital T. Although who knows how long Twitter is going to remain a stable platform at time of recording. We had just heard about the new limitations.
Yes. And I will put all of these in the description so that they're clickable links. Bryon, before we go, do you have any works or other stuff that you want to plug?
I mean, I have my own written stuff, but that's not what I really would suggest to people. There is a work of criticism that I've found that is the most additive work of criticism I've ever seen. The one that not only illuminated the subject, but went beyond and became a real achievement in its own right. And it's on the topic of humor and where it discusses a lot of the vocabulary of humor, and if you will. And it's an article called How Wile E. Coyote Explains the World. And it's wonderful.
That sounds pretty interesting. I'll have to take a look at that, if only partly because part of my life has felt like a Wile E. Coyote scheme.
Yes, it's like I said, it's criticism, but it's the most additive sort of criticism that I've ever seen in terms of illuminating not only its subject, but a lot of the things that the subject is treating. And it speaks a lot about the vocabulary of humor and how these things work. And it's written with open admiration for Chuck Jones and all that he did with the animation in question. And it's just a treat. It's a treat. How Wile E. Coyote Explains the World. I love it.
Hey, well, I am and have been Maya, and today I was joined by
Bryon.
And as always, I am Ian. Until next time, bye.